So good evening, everyone. My name is Sherry Ziller. I am the interim CEO at the Northwest Indiana Regional Development Authority. And it is my privilege to welcome you all to a virtual public meeting. We are here tonight to review and discuss the transit development process surrounding the Portage portion around the Portage Ogden Dunes South Shore Station. So tonight I am joined by the City of Portage. Mayor Sue Lynch is with us, and we also have AJ Monroe, and he is their Director of Planning. And then also joining us are members of the RDA planning team. And we are all here tonight to discuss the specifics of the potential development around the Portage portion of Portage Ogden Dunes South Shore Station. So before I turn the virtual microphone over to the City of Portage, let me begin by setting the stage for this process. The RDA was given the task as part of its establishing legislation to assist in developing and furthering commuter rail in Northwest Indiana. And that's part of the strategy to increase the connectivity with Chicago and grow the economy of this region. So the state provided funding, and in the 2015 and then again in the 2017 legislative sessions made it very clear that the RDA was to take the lead in the financing of the rail expansions. So further in 2017, the state tasked the RDA with assisting the municipalities in which the stations were situated and provided funding mechanisms to help in planning for and financing their TOD, their transit-oriented development. So I think as the slide shows, the planning entities. So here I would say during the past 2 years, the RDA has been meeting with our station area community leaders to better understand their own visions and planning concepts for TOD. The RDA has pulled together a planning team to assist in these efforts, and you can see what's on the screen, but consisting of MKSK, KPMG, and Policy Analytics, whom you'll hear from throughout the presentation and during the Q&A session. So this virtual meeting tonight is the next step in the process of bringing what we consider a unique set of development tools into play to really help grow the Northwest Indiana economy and further establish a high quality of life for our region. And just as a matter of an update, on October 28th last year, the Federal Transit Administration, the FTA, signed the grant providing the funding to make the Westlake Corridor project a reality. So that's very exciting news. NICD, the Northwest Indiana Commuter Transportation District, they're already working with its design and construction teams to begin the 4+ years of work to make the Westlake line operational. But I guess I would say the RDA, in convening this meeting tonight, is moving forward kind of on our own separate mission, which is to ensure that the best possible options for development around the station areas are considered, they're agreed to by the communities, and eventually funded and put into place. So the next slide should be the role of the RDA. Yep, and you can see what's on the screen, but really the role of the RDA is to help communities create more attractive, secure neighborhoods. And as we navigate through this process, we really are enabling our communities to compete for those young professionals that work in Chicago, and to make our communities more attractive for the businesses and the people who will work in Indiana. So the RDA, we want to work with you to strengthen your community, to help enhance what you love about it, to enhance your livability. So whatever your interest is, whether you're a resident, if you're a developer, you're a business owner, community stewards, we are grateful for your willingness to participate in this conversation tonight, and we look forward to making this a very successful development process. So with that, I will hand it over to the City of Portage to say a few words on the Portage portion of the South Shore Station. And again, I just want to thank you all for your time and participation tonight. So City of Portage.
Thanks, Sherry. On behalf of Mayor Lynch and the City of Portage, I'd like to thank the RDA for hosting this meeting to discuss the Portage Ogden Dunes Transit Development District. Personally, I've had the opportunity and privilege to work with the Northwest Indiana RDA for many years on a number of projects, both in the City of Portage and across Northwest Indiana. I've always found the authority to be professional and singularly focused on building a better Northwest Indiana. Most recently, I've had the opportunity to continue work with the RDA as a committee member on the Transit Development District Steering Committee. I'd like to thank Mayor Lynch for entrusting me to represent the city of Portage on that committee. My experience on the committee really reinforces what I said earlier about professionalism and a genuine commitment to building a better Northwest Indiana. Again, I'd like to thank the RDA and their team for consulting the City of Portage, myself, Mayor Lynch, and so many others to help us get a better understanding of the benefits of the Transit Development District and how the district will better enable Portage to realize the vision of Portage's North Side Master Plan, something that the city has discussed immediately after the introduction of the Marquette Plan. So I'm really looking forward to the presentation and hope that everybody on the call find what's going to be shared through the presentation beneficial. And I know you've got a great group of professionals here on the call to answer any questions that may be asked. And if those answers can't be given, that we will definitely make sure that we get back to any of those folks on the presentation who ask a question that we are unable to answer at the time. So thank you, Sherry, for the kind words, the introduction. And at this point, I will turn it over to Eric Lucas to continue with the presentation.
I appreciate that, AJ, and I'll just lead off by again expressing how we've enjoyed working with the city to get to this point. A lot of the work that you'll see here is a direct outcome of a lot of collaboration with your leadership, and we've worked back and forth to arrive at the materials that we've got to share out this evening. So we're really happy with where we are. We really want to make sure that through the course of this evening, not only do we get to share that out, but we also get to hear those who are attending on this meeting, your thoughts as well. This isn't the end of the road for the process. This is a step in the process. So we do want to get your feedback, and we'll tell you a little bit about that process here shortly. As AJ mentioned, I'm Eric Lucas. I'm working with the RDA as MKSK. We're looking at the overall urban planning component of this with our fellow consultants, KPMG and Policy Analytics. And as we get underway here, most of you know the significance of this project and what it does mean to the economic future of Northwest Indiana. And as we talk through some of the benefits of this project, we can't overlook what it could mean to bringing new investment into your community and surrounding communities as well, and the connectivity into Chicago, and what that means to Northwest Indiana. So you see here some of the projected figures for what could happen over time as this project occurs. Next slide. And also you see here, and Sherry touched on this, some of the work underway and some of the funding that has been approved for the actual construction component of the project, and along the South Shore double track, of course, which is what we're talking primarily about this evening. It's a fairly lengthy project, including 16 miles of new double track, second track, to shorten the times to get in and out of the station into Chicago. So there's tremendous amount of investment, about $500 million along this particular line. Next slide. And then on the Westlake component of the project, of course, a smaller section of rail, but a new section of rail. So now extending this connectivity southward into Dyer. And with the new construction, we're seeing costs of about $850 million to implement this line of the project. So quite a bit underway already in terms of the public infrastructure investment. Next slide, and you can see how together this is that regional connectivity and economic development opportunity that really links all these great communities together, and then also into Chicago. Next slide. As we begin to think through what we call transit development districts, that's something you're going to hear a lot about, and we'll define what that is in a moment. We take a step back and understand with the introduction of this, this connectivity asset, what does it mean beyond the transportation piece? What does it mean for individual communities? And where we've seen this kind of investment and this connectivity into a major metro like Chicago, we've seen opportunities within the community for new development, redevelopment, and economic growth. And we show this slide because it demonstrates that communities who have experienced this kind of growth around commuter rail lines grow at different paces and grow at different rates. And that's really important to point out. Communities along the South Shore Double Track line or along the Westlake line are unique. They have their own set of characteristics, their own priorities. And so growth, the rate of growth and the type of growth will vary across the region. And that's really important. And that's the underpinning to how we've been working with not only the city of Portage, but all the other communities. We want to understand your goals for growth, and that'll really impact the pace and the type of growth that you see over time. Next slide. And so in order to sort of set the table for the conversation tonight, we have 4 different topics that we want to cover. We want to give you all a bit of a primer about what transit development districts are, about the process that we've undertaken to get to this point. And then we want to turn our attention toward the specific area around Portage and talk about sort of what exists today and what opportunities we might see. And then with that, we want to share out what we have tonight as a draft TDD boundary. Next slide, please. And as we go through the presentation, you'll see some of these prompts. You've already seen a handful of prompts all thus far. These are live poll questions that we have throughout the presentation. We're really trying to sort of learn more along the way. We've done that thus far with the communities, and tonight we want to hear from you. There's also an ability to ask us questions in the question and answer dialog box, and that's really important for us. We'll take those questions throughout the presentation. We'll assemble those, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll answer those questions, time permitting. So please do offer your questions for us this evening. There's also an opportunity to revisit this presentation through a recording on the project webpage. That's www.nwitdd.com. Not only would you be able to see a recording of this presentation, you'll also be able to see answers to the questions posed this evening, and you'll be able to peruse what we call gallery materials. These are materials that are virtually the same as what you'll see tonight, but in a different format. These materials will also be displayed in the city for you to peruse at your own time. Through COVID, of course, we've had to adjust how we normally would conduct public meetings. So we're offering these virtual sessions, we're offering the web page, and then we're offering the ability to go look at static boards and sort of take the information in as you view it on paper at your own pace. And when you do that, there's also the opportunity to participate in polling questions and give feedback as well. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for you to let us know your thoughts. Next slide, please. So now we'll talk a little bit about what a transit development district boundary is, which is the whole point of tonight. And transit development districts really center around promoting the kind of development that's attracted to transit connectivity. So this is transit-oriented development that will occur generally within a short distance from the stations, and that will provide economic growth to your community. And that is part and parcel to the investment on the public side that is being made at the transit station. So what we're doing is we're creating a boundary that really relates to the area around the station. That boundary, we'll talk about what that boundary means, but the purpose of that boundary is to deliver upon some of the goals that you have as a community and to support the vision of growth that you have in Portage. Next slide, please. And that's really important to underscore, because this really complements how you would like to grow. As you all know, when investments occur like this, economic growth occurs with it. And so it's very important to understand the kind of economic growth that you would like to see and to put your community on the right path to that economic growth. Otherwise, when growth happens in an organic or maybe unplanned way, sometimes it can lead to unintended consequences. Next slide, please. And so when we define the TDD, the Transit Development District, we always find it's helpful to describe what that is, but also what it is not. We'll talk a lot about what it is. It's an area of about 320 acres around the station, has to be connected to the station, and it does promote the economic development in your community. We'll talk about how we've arrived at that. But what it is not is it's not zoning. This is not a new comprehensive plan for your community. This is not a process of eminent domain. We're not working directly with any individual developers to craft the boundary. This is something that is complementary to your growth. It's not a part of the double track or Westlake Rail projects. So we often get questions about the station area design, and those questions are best answered by NICD, who's running that aspect of this greater project. But we're here to really talk about what the boundary is and what it is not. Next slide, please. And so as I mentioned, the boundary has to be contiguous around the station area. And at its beginning point here, it can't be any larger than 320 acres, which is the equivalent of a half square mile in area. Next slide. And that shape can take all kinds of different interesting configurations. You can see in the sort of gray circle what a pure sort of 320 acres would look like if it were drawn in a radial pattern at a half-mile area. And that's a short walking distance. It's obviously something that complements the notion of transit, so that transit is a place to sort of leverage additional mobility options. But as you'll see this evening, the boundary will take on many different sort of interesting geometries, and that's really to dial in on the specific opportunities that you have in Portage. We want to be strategic with what this boundary looks like. Next slide, please. And then as we've talked a little bit about, this is an economic development tool. And what the district boundary will enable is a new incremental revenue capture. So we'll be able to capture incremental growth in local income tax and property tax within the boundary itself. And the amount that's captured, that increment that's captured, will then be reinvested within the same boundary. So it's a way to capture the incremental growth and then reinvest it back in terms of infrastructure and the things that will help support the economic development that you would like to see in your community. Next slide. I just mentioned this, but it's really important to know that even though we're working across about a dozen communities and numerous stations, that the revenue collected within the boundary we're going to share tonight will have to be reinvested back in this boundary. It doesn't move out to Michigan City or Munster. It stays right here in this boundary. And it's also really important to know, as we mentioned a moment ago, this is really an economic development tool. It's a boundary. This does not change land use. In fact, the local authority still retains the control of land use and zoning. So this process doesn't affect that, that local control at all. Next slide, please. The way in which the revenue is captured can be quite complex. So what we've tried to do here is give you an overview of how that works. And within the boundary that you'll see in a moment, again, that's where we can capture incremental property and local income tax revenue for development that occurs within that transit station area. That revenue then can be reinvested back in the district. After this boundary expires, then the incremental revenue is transferred back to the base. And so if you're familiar with the notion of a TIF district, which is a tax increment financing district, it's very similar to that. And there are cases, including in the boundary we'll share with you this evening, where the TIF that you already have in your community does overlap with the TDD. And in cases like that, those revenues that are already being captured on an incremental basis in your TIF district will be negotiated with the RDA and with your local RDC in terms of how those revenues are allocated to be reinvested back in the same district. Next slide, please. And so as part of our process, of course, we've been working a lot, as we mentioned, with the local leadership, but in addition to that, we're sharing information out this evening, hoping to get more feedback, hearing your thoughts. And then after this evening, the work will continue. We'll make adjustments as necessary, and then we'll take this work to 2 public hearings that will be held by the RDA so that they can approve the boundaries. And once that boundary approval occurs, then those boundaries are sent to the State Budget Committee for final approval and adoption. Next slide, please. And so as part of the way in which we've worked, we'll kind of walk you through the process a little bit here. Next slide. And I would say we've got 4 steps. I would say we're about 3/4 of the way through the 4 steps at this point. The 4 steps began over a year and a half ago, and continue today. The first step in our process is really becoming familiar not only with the station area, but with the community in general. This is where we learn a lot about the planning work that you've done, about your sort of vision for the community. We've visited station areas, we've toured the community, we've gained a lot of knowledge through mapping the area, through looking at your community planning efforts that you've already done. We've also held numerous sessions with the local leadership to really interpret what we're seeing and hearing, and to gain a much deeper understanding of the things that we've gleaned. And so this is also where we're learning about other things that might be in the pipeline in your community, other projects, other economic development opportunities that are happening. This is also where we get to test our impressions, where we get to vet ideas and test things out so that we can adjust when we know that we may not be hitting the mark. So we've walked through those first 2 steps, and now we're in this 3rd step where we've been collaborating not only with the community but also with NICD on the station area itself. We've begun to integrate the preferences and the feedback that we've gotten to this point. We've integrated market research to understand, the strategic opportunities within your community. And we've shared back and forth a couple of different test boundaries here to know if we're on the right track. All along the way, we're keeping an eye out towards the things that may be complementary to new economic development. So those things could include new roads, new infrastructure, new open space, new quality of life enhancements, trails, those sorts of things that might be supportive of new investment with respect to economic development. So that brings us to step 4, which is where we are. We're sharing information out. We hope to get your input so that we can move into the public hearing phase of the process, and then ultimately to the State Budget Committee. Next slide, please. So as we begin the work of looking at the boundaries themselves, we talk through a lot of data some of that's more quantitative, mapping based, where we can really assess sort of the area on a quantitative basis in an analytical way. Some of that's more on the qualitative side of things, impressions, your visions, things that are underway, previous planning efforts, some of those things that can be more open to interpretation. And then we also look at specific sites, and we get very detail oriented with some of the obstacles and opportunities, quite frankly, that could exist parcel by parcel. And that's how we can begin to draft an area that sort of has a foundation built upon a lot of different factors. It's defensible and it's been vetted. Next slide, please. When we get down to that area specific set of criteria, we really want to understand what exists today and how that impacts the boundary. We certainly need to know things like where brownfields exist today, those mean contaminated sites, where there might be a lack of infrastructure, or on the opposite side of that, where infrastructure is in really good shape and where it can be leveraged. Maybe we want to understand if there's a lot of vacancy, how far away we are from the station. Some of the other things you've already looked at in terms of your planning and some of your priority sites around your community. So we look at a lot of these different factors to understand whether parcels are a good fit to being within the boundary. And then once we get to that stage, next slide, we begin to understand within this larger boundary that you're about to see, this 320 acres, what can happen in here? It's not that we have firm proposals for what exactly would occur everywhere within the boundary, but we want to know that there's room for a lot of different economic development activities. And those activities are sort of along this spectrum that you see here. Some of those things could be adaptive reuse. Maybe there's a good quality neighborhood or a good quality downtown with buildings that can be reused, rehabilitated, renovated, and put back out. Sometimes we're really looking to preserve assets that are within the boundary. That's important because there could be waterways, there could be open spaces, there could be strong neighborhoods that exist today. In this case, we have a marina. It's a very strong component of this portion of Portage. So we want to preserve and enhance those things. And sometimes we want to strengthen those things. Other times we want to do infill, where there's already a lot of great economic development, but not all of it's built out. There are areas that are prime for development. We want to look at those areas for infill. And then finally, there could be large areas of land. And in this case, there are, in fact, large areas of land in this area that could be good candidates for redevelopment. Maybe they've not been developed thus far. Maybe they're brownfields, but they're large sites that could be sort of redevelopment opportunities. So in general, we like to keep our suite of economic development tools broad when we think through the applicability of 320 acres. And so with that, then we pivot to thinking specifically about the area around the station in Portage. And for that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Aaron Kowalski, who does just an amazing job of understanding all these conditions on each of these stations. And he'll walk you through what we've begun to explore here in Portage. Aaron?
Thanks, Eric. So I'm going to walk you all through kind of what we've learned so far about this part of Portage and Ogden Dunes, as this is, a station that straddles both Ogden Dunes and Portage. And I'm looking at the list of folks that have joined us today, and I'm seeing a few familiar names from Ogden Dunes. So thanks for joining us again. We've visited this area. We've met with both city and town staff, and we've worked to learn as much as possible about the opportunities. And we'll get into some of the recommendations that and as AJ was saying, this boundary can help propel forward the North Side Master Plan that the city of Portage has supported over the years, and the investment that's already occurred. But there is a tremendous opportunity in this area. This is one of the last areas within the city of Portage that can be developed and has undeveloped property that can fairly easily be developed. So the fact that this is near a train station is really a wonderful opportunity for the community, and we're looking to really impress upon that. Before that, though, we really worked with the city of Portage to understand, what are the city's economic development goals for this area. So, they do want to implement the North Side Master Plan. That's a good plan. The community has supported the plan over the years. And this is all about creating a livable lakefront. This is about supporting the marina, offering different kinds of housing and businesses within this portion of Portage, and better integrating, into Lake Michigan and the Indiana Dunes National Park, and really supporting that as part of the fabric of the community. And the fact that, Indiana Dunes is now a national park definitely ups the caliber of kind of all the different sites, where be it West Beach or Tolleson Dunes, that's right near this TDD. And then really building a healthy and sustainable economy and community, both environmentally, economically, and socially, and looking for, opportunities to do that through good quality development, and celebrating life through, activating place, community festivals, music, sport, and the arts, all of which could be into this kind of a development. As we look through other things, that the city of Portage has already done, we've looked at land use, we've looked at zoning, and we've really worked to understand kind of what some of the goals were in the past as well as currently for this area. We've leaned heavily on the North Side Master Plan, which, as I mentioned, is a good master plan. It's a good idea for, what could happen in this area. And we believe that the opportunities that were explored as part of this master plan are still true and are only amplified by the investment in the train and in the station. Other things that are occurring, Ameriplex is a huge economic development engine for the community, and that is really close to this area. And then, of course, Marina Shores, and the first couple phases have developed. We're looking at another phase that will develop soon, and we're looking at incorporating that into the boundary as well. So another big part of the equation here is, how do we leverage recent public investments? So investments like the completed portion of Burns Parkway, like trails and other things in the community. Those investments are really the key to positioning additional areas for investment in the future, and looking at where planned investments could occur in conjunction with this economic development district. For instance, the extension of Burns Parkway up to US 12, which could really unlock a lot of property for future economic development and development. Eric had mentioned we went through a pretty detailed kind of step-by-step, both qualitative and quantitative analysis. We looked at everything from floodplain to wetland properties to land use. We looked a lot at ownership, and in particular where ownership is consolidated in these areas. We're able to understand a lot of opportunities from that. Public ownership is another key part of the equation, both thinking about properties that cannot be developed, for instance, properties owned by either the National Park Service or State Department of Natural Resources. We look at things like TIF districts and how this district could interface with an existing TIF and kind of what that means, and what a walkable area could look like in this area if additional sidewalks and road infrastructure were built. So the next part kind of I'll walk you through is the actual boundary and how we arrived at the boundary through kind of a step-by-step analysis. And I know we had this map up earlier, but just to orient folks, we really are looking at an area kind of, within both Portage and Ogden Dunes, centered around kind of an enhanced station area, the marina, and then you kind of see a lot of property that's undeveloped between the interstate, Crispin Road, kind of the built part of Burns Parkway, and the Portage Burns Waterway and utility easement. So there's a lot of property here that we're looking at that could be incorporated into this boundary. And just to zoom in a little bit further, just to give folks some context of the station area itself, this is the existing station parking area and station platform. And then NICD is moving forward with a proposal to build a secondary parking area across US 12. And you can see plans for that. And just to reiterate, we are not NICD. We are just responding to, the investment of the train and the parking area by helping craft this economic development area that can help spur development in the future. So, as we start to dial in on a boundary, again, we're looking at the station area, and you see 2 walk circles on here as the crow flies. If there were roads and sidewalks, really we're looking at an area that would be kind of a 10 to 20 minute radius if you were walking in this area, because as development occurs, that really helps create an area that could be walkable in the future. So that gets us to the boundary, and we'd like to preview the boundary first and then walk through kind of how we arrived at it step by step. So just to preview it for context purposes, we're at about 329 acres. So what we like to do in this stage of the process is have a boundary that we call our study area that's a bit larger than what's allowed by statute. And then we'll be working with the community and working guided by input that we get tonight to help bring that boundary down below the 320 or half-mile threshold. As we start looking at the boundary, anchors are the first thing we look at. So what are things that are important to the community, are activity centers for the community, like the lakefront, like the station area, the yacht club and marina, like the Indiana Dunes National Park. These are places that people go to, and these are anchors in the community. And there could be some anchors that are included in the boundary. There could be some that are not included in the boundary. And as I go through these series of slides, you'll see kind of 2 shades of color. So the darker shade of color in general is an area that we've identified perhaps to have in the boundary. Commercial areas, there's commercial kind of in the periphery. I talked about a Ameriplex where Bass Pro Shops is. And, so there are some commercial areas, but really there's not much commercial up towards US 12 where the station area is. There could be, however, quite a bit of commercial development in the future. Industrial areas, again, kind of outside of kind of the sphere of what we're looking at, but all the same, we're inventorying these areas and understanding how they complement the community today and the employment base. Then we start looking at areas, such as residential areas. And as Eric mentioned, when we're looking at residential areas that are stable and developed in nature, we may take them into the boundary knowing that property values will likely increase in the future and that this boundary can capture some of the incomes of people that or income taxes of people that are living there as well. So, we're looking at these areas not only, from a kind of an overview perspective, but there may be some areas that we want to include. But by and large part, we want to kind of focus in on areas that are not necessarily residential in nature and focus mostly on vacant, what we call underutilized or publicly owned land. And you can see a lot of these different shades of gray here that represent a lot of property that's vacant. As many of you might remember, this is the site of kind of the Catalyst lifestyle sport development that was going to occur a few years back. So a lot of that property was assembled and that development has not happened. So that property is vacant. It's underutilized fields. A lot of it's outside of the floodplain and could be developed in the future. There's also property that the City of Portage Redevelopment Commission has kind of assembled and owns that is, also part of some future development opportunities. So looking at those areas in particular here gives us a lot of opportunities to kind of draw from, especially kind of in the center of this study area. Previous plans, so we mentioned the Northside Master Plan and how it's a really good, valid plan that the community would like to bring forward and would like to use this economic development boundary to help move forward with. And so you'll see the area in green, which by and large part is the area where that master plan covered. And there's a lot of that ground also incorporated into this boundary. And then some additional areas in orange that, based on our analysis, makes sense to include as well. So that gets us to what I call our composite boundary. And I know you see a lot of colors here on the map. I'll advance now back to that map we started with, the 329 acres. And, really, that's how we arrived at the boundary through a lot of analysis. But just to give you guys a kind of a short overview of really how we work through the process to achieve that boundary. We also talk about TIF districts, and we talked about that a little earlier. As we move forward in this process, there will be some interaction within the city's existing TIF district and this future district. And really the goal is to have them complement each other. And we'd be happy to go into more detail during the Q&A about that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Eric to talk about complementary community growth.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, so the boundary is really to help provide an economic development tool to implement the kind of development that you would like to see in your community. And alongside with that, of course, there can be a lot of different types of development, particularly in the areas that we're talking about here, that can complement your community, maybe even provide a new dimension to your community. Maybe as you see in some of these images, the concept of different types of housing in some of those upper right photos, maybe the combination of retail, restaurants, and shops that could be on the ground floor of buildings that have multiple levels to them. There could be amenities along the waterways, of course, that could support economic development boardwalks and trails and park spaces that could front the amenity, but also then could become a place for new development to back up to and have an address upon. Of course, with the businesses and the infrastructure that's already in place in this area, as Aaron mentioned, there's the opportunity for office space as well, as you sort of see in that lower right-hand image. So really in this particular station area, more so than a lot of the communities that we're looking in, because of the available and open land area, there's quite a bit of opportunity here to do a variety of different things that complement the natural assets of the waterways as well as of the national park, and really help to present a new identity to Portage. Here are a handful of other images that also sort of get at that concept of economic development and the kind of development that could occur here to establish maybe a new village center around this station area. At some point in time, structured parking could be an opportunity. If that were to occur, of course, that would mean additional density and a higher use of the land in order to support structured parking versus on-grade parking. So lots of different scenarios could play out over the years in this station area. And these are just a handful of examples of what that could look like. Of course, in the end, the city and you all as community members kind of control what you would like to see there. Next slide, please. And just to circle back, this is a slide, of course, that we've presented earlier, but it's helpful to recap that within that large area that Aaron just presented, there are many different strategies that we continue to think about that would be available for you all to employ within the boundary itself, so that it's not sort of a one-size-fits-all kind of approach to economic development, but that you really maintain your identity and your creativity through using different strategies for the right areas of that boundary. Next slide. We've reiterated this quite often throughout the presentation, but really this is more than just a line on a sheet of paper. It really will help to promote the kind of growth that you would like to see because of its ability to capture the revenue and reinvest that revenue back into the boundary itself, into the area. So it's really a helpful economic development tool that'll help continue along your growth preferences. Next slide. And then just to recap again, there are multiple ways that you can continue to give us feedback, including this evening and on our webpage. Please do dial that up. It's www.nwitdd.com. And next slide. The next steps here, I mentioned earlier in the presentation that we've also put together what we call a gallery. These are large scale printed boards with similar content to what you viewed on in this presentation tonight. You can view those on the webpage. You can also view those at City Hall. I don't believe they're up quite yet, but they will be soon. AJ, you can correct me on that. And then, of course, the webpage, we've mentioned that a couple of times now. Our next steps here would be to take the feedback that we get into work, not only with your community leadership, but also the Ogden Dunes leadership to refine the boundary so that we can move those forward to the RDA public hearings and then ultimately the state budget committee. Next slide. And so as we conclude the presentation component of this meeting, we want to invite you all to ask questions. We'll do our best to answer those questions, and we'll continue to take those questions. I think we only have one right now so far, but we'll hold on the line for a while to see if other questions pop up. We've gotten some questions in other presentations throughout the verbal portion of the presentation, but we actually get quite a few kind of come up right at this moment. So the first one is sort of a comment here. It's a great comment, actually, because as Aaron mentioned, there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of open ground, a lot of land that could be activated and potentially made more readily available for development if it were connected up. So this comment really gets to the heart of that. It says, I'd like to see roads connectivity through the TDD area. And I think that's really one of the primary opportunities for the reinvestment of the increment. We talked about, the tool that this is, the Transit Development District boundary is a real tool for you all. One of the ways that incremental revenue can be reinvested is in things like roads to connect areas up. And of course, in this case, you could really see that connection all the way down from US 12 through this study area down to roads and areas and developments that are already in place today. So it really is, there are some missing links within this boundary area that could really benefit from the economic development tool that we're talking about. It's a great observation. And in addition, some of the connectivity could involve not just streets, but as AJ pointed out earlier, the community's done a really great job with the Marquette Plan and others to promote active transportation, trails, and other things that really sort of leverage your natural assets in the community and really help to connect things out for bikes and pedestrians too. So the next question we have here is, how can I be supportive of future development improvements from a city side? It's a good question. I think as we round out the work of creating the boundary here, which is the line on the drawing, I think the community has a great moment next to really think through the kinds of things that they really would like to see, you all would like to see within that boundary. That's really a great way to start it off and be supportive of the future development and to promote that development. I think some of the ideas we've shared this evening are a starting point, but when you're thinking it through as a resident or as a community member, or maybe somebody who works in the city as a city staff, you can really be thinking about that as a next step to promote the kinds of development that really could happen here. This is, prime ground for development. The next question we have here is, what is the timeline on this approval? It's a really good question. Of course, COVID has really altered a lot of what we do these days, most notably schedules on projects. Luckily, this project has always maintained its momentum, but getting together and having hearings and meetings has been impacted, actually, even though the work in the background has continued. the timeline for getting out to the community has slowed a bit. So that's really the first step that we need to accomplish, which is happening this evening, so that we can get out to the RDA public hearings and the ultimate approval. We're hoping that that can occur this spring. We don't have a firm timetable, and things are subject to change. So we're having meetings this winter in order to set us up for eventual approval, hopefully this spring. The added development means additional policing. How will that affect Ogden Dunes policing, or is this an afterthought? So the policing aspect of this, public safety in general, really wouldn't be a component of what we're referring to this evening. The kinds of things that we would see as eligible for the revenue, the incremental revenue that's captured here would go towards infrastructure, it would go towards incentives for development, but not to supporting additional public safety. And my colleagues at Policy Analytics can correct me if I'm mistaken on that or misspoke. But really, this is an economic development tool that will help to promote additional development in the community, which does add revenue into the community. Often that does lead to growth, and it leads to additional things like park spaces, additional roads, additional infrastructure, potentially even additional public safety measures too. But that is a separate process from what we're working through this evening. Those are all good questions as part of general community growth. The next question we have here is, will NICD invest in good crosswalks across, I think, US 12? I do believe NICD is looking at that with crossings along US 12 at signalized areas, and promoting pedestrians to those crosswalks through walkways, and using measures to safely get pedestrians across US 12 from parking areas to the station area. We don't have the details on those this evening, but I do know that they've made a lot of good progress on that particular aspect of station area design. And definitely you can work with NICD to understand the current plans, but a lot of progress has been made there. When will the final boundary be known? So as I mentioned a little earlier, we're hoping this springtime we were able to kind of finalize things. The feedback we get this evening will help us to get to that point as we revise the boundary, given any comments that we hear tonight, or any comments that follow up with meetings with local leadership. We'll incorporate that into the boundary and adjust as we need to, so that we can have those hearings. Is the current design developed to go for maximum efficiency and safety and cohesion with the entrance to Ogden Dunes? That might be a question about the station design. And I believe that the station area design is been vetted with with local leadership in both communities, and does coordinate well with the entrance to Ogden Dunes. The work that we're reviewing this evening, though, is really about the boundary, and the boundary really doesn't affect how that component of the NICD project moves forward. That is something that I know, again, NICD's put a lot of thought into, though, particularly with the parking being on the opposite side of US 12, the expanded parking being on the opposite side of US 12. Will this fund Burns Parkway extension? That's a great question. It's a possibility. I don't know that any decisions, of course, have been made about which pieces of infrastructure would be the priorities. I think that's a great conversation. Kind of to piggyback on an earlier question about what can we do to promote the economic or support the economic development. One of the things that the community can also begin to do is really map out where new infrastructure could go. The logical Burns Parkway extension, of course, is one of those components to link up to pieces that have already been built and to the new parking area that NICD will be constructing. So that's one that certainly seems like a good candidate. There are going to be others as well. So those decisions are for the future. I think that's where, local leadership will really help to shape not only the enhancements that happen from a public road and public space perspective, but also then from a private economic development perspective. The next question is, will this village be a PUD? That's another, maybe another great, future consideration. I know PUDs have been used often in the area. Potentially this area could go that route. The community might also look to, do some further planning here. Really, that's a to be determined next activity. Certainly with the sort of lack of infrastructure to majority of the area that we've looked at, and with the vast amount of open ground, there would likely need to be some structure there in terms of how development could occur in the future. But that, I think, is a great next question, a next step for the community to undertake with the boundary being in place. The next question here is about mass transit. Mass transit will change with more jobs going remote. Is this spending going to produce revenue? So I think there are a couple of questions or thoughts in there. One is really, given our situation and how we've all sort of adapted to working in a more nimble way. This meeting is a great example. Typically, we'd be working with you in more hands-on and dynamic fashion. But I think that it's true that things are changing in terms of how we work. How long and how permanent that will be, I think, is up for a lot of debate. I think there is a good thought that there will be more flexibility into the future with how people do work, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the transit won't be absolutely necessary. In fact, it will maybe help to promote the communities in different ways. It could mean that more jobs come to this area because the transit is available. So people might be commuting into this space from other communities outside for jobs, or maybe people are taking the trains from this area to get to jobs. Maybe people are taking the trains to vacation, to come to the park, to visit friends, family. Maybe people are taking transit to a second home or to a property that they own in a different community where they reside. So I think the train will always provide the connectivity that's going to be critical. How we all adapt into the future with jobs, I think, is somewhat to be determined, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to really harness the potential of the train for multiple things beyond commuting into Chicago just for the employment opportunity in Chicago. The next question is, will the Marquette Trail be built with these dollars? Again, another great question for the city to consider as the increment is captured and as proceeds are built here. As that increment grows, the city will begin to think through with the RDA how that increment is then reinvested. Things like trails could be good opportunities, good candidates for sure, particularly given the history of building great trails in Portage. Are the light colored vacant lots not included in the center of the diagram included in the TDD? Aaron, you may want to jump in on this.
Yeah,
let
me take that one. So a lot of the vacant lands are included in the boundary. We did exclude some vacant property from the boundary because of the reason for Burns Parkway needing to be built to connect up to US 12. So some of the properties to the immediate east and west of kind of that future Burns Parkway expansion may develop later. One thing that we should mention is, in addition to the 320 acre or 1/2 mile threshold, this TDD boundary can be expanded up to 1 square mile in the future. So some of the areas that are adjacent to this, further west in particular, could be included in a future boundary expansion that the statute allows. So if it's not in the boundary today, but it's vacant, it's strategic because we thought it may develop later on in the timeline due to the infrastructure needed. And so we're really focused on what could develop earlier, but again, it could be in a future expansion of the boundary.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate that clarification. The next comment I love. Thank you very much. This is really cool. I really think that, this is something that's unique in the state of Indiana. Northwest Indiana is sort of on the cutting edge here of developing these transit development districts. So this is a new tool that other communities and other areas across the state may look to, quite frankly, because this is really cool. This is a way to really promote the growth that you would like to see and leverage this great investment of transit in a really sustainable manner. So really, we're seeing a lot of great ideas converging here to promote great community building. The next question is about marketing. How will the property be marketed? I think, there's a lot of different ways in which that can occur, actually. I think the first step to that is really tonight, we want to make sure that you all have a good handle on what it is this is. And that's the first marketing step, to be honest, is to get people excited about it and to make sure that we're doing this in a way that's consistent with the community's vision. And beyond that, once the boundary is finalized, then the real work begins. There's been a lot of work to this point, but the real work begins about really creating the notions of what could happen in there, the kinds of infrastructure, the kinds of development that could happen, and then marketing those things a little more strategically. So that's a multi sort of phased approach to marketing the overall notion here. The property that is within the boundary, of course, is in many cases it's private property. It's held in private ownership. So those folks who own the property have a great opportunity to sort of leverage everything we're talking about here, to market their property, to effectuate the kind of development that you all want to see in the community, or to bring about new change in this TDD area. And then the next question here is, will NPS have a shuttle or trail to the train stop? We haven't worked with NPS on that aspect of additional sort of connectivity options or additional ways in which we can access the park. What you did see, though, in the maps that Aaron shared is that we have great frontage up against sort of the eastern edge of the park with the boundary, which really gives us a great opportunity to really think through the kind of development that can be very sensitive, have an ecological purpose that would complement the park and really help to sort of promote the park. So the park would be an aspect of the development in terms of promoting not only development, but the park at the same time. So although we haven't coordinated with the Park Service to understand trail connectivity and shuttles and those sorts of things, there really is a great opportunity in the future for the city and the RDA to sort of really work that angle a little bit. This is one of the station areas with that proximity to the park. Other station areas do have that, and it's something to really consider. So appreciate the question. It's really good.
Hey, Eric, just to add to that, so the trail referenced in that last question is built to some extent from Portage Lakefront and Riverfront to the south property. So the user can continue on a shared roadway currently, but it's connected, via a side path and shared roadway, and that was built by Portage and the RDA. So further linkages to that and to the Market Trail could occur further south and over to some of the national park properties in the future, but there is some infrastructure existing.
Okay, so the next question here is about the Burns Parkway construction in the future and how that would potentially intersect with US 12 given the traffic volumes. And then there's a second question I'll get to in a moment, but just on that first question. So really we haven't designed Burns Parkway here in this exercise. Burns Parkway right at US 12 would be improved with the NICD parking lot. But as far as how it extends down through the TDD and connects up to further south would be designed at a later date. And with any future design of Burns Parkway, you would look at the traffic projections. Those projections would be a combination of what exists today in terms of development and what could be projected for development. So you want to make sure that you leave open the space to adequately size Burns Parkway so that it can carry today's traffic and tomorrow's traffic. And then of course, as you get to US 12, you would size out the number of lanes, et cetera, to be able to provide for turning movements to gain access onto US 12. So that's a future effort, but it's something definitely to keep in mind. The second question there is the current design developed for a maximum efficiency and cohesion. I think we answered this one a little earlier about the cohesion with the entrance to Ogden Dunes. The next question here is, this area would be a great area for a campground to service the national park and train service to Chicago. So as I mentioned a moment ago, this is one of the station areas that does have adjacency to the park. So there's a tremendous opportunity for, the train to be an asset for folks coming from Chicago to visit the park. Maybe they stay in Portage. Maybe they have a second home in Portage. Maybe there's another amenity that they're visiting alongside the park. So the train, again, getting back to my original thought about the way that COVID is changing the way we work, the train will actually help to promote these communities in multiple ways, not just through, commuting to jobs, but things like this. The park is a pristine place, obviously, and it's something that people from Chicago do want to visit. So the train gives folks all kinds of new opportunities for that connectivity to Portage and other communities.
Hey, Eric, on the notion of connectivity, I that question above where we were talking about TDD and Burns Parkway being constructed to the future, we also want to, mention that, we've looked with NICD and we've been working with the city to understand kind of where that road would ultimately align with US 12 and how that would interact with, of course, the main entrance to Ogden Dunes further west at Hillcrest, and really trying to understand the connectivity also to, US 12 and 249. So those things are kind of being taken into consideration, especially by the city and their engineers as they're kind of identifying future needs and then also future development. And of course, NDOT will be a major player as improvements are made to US 12 in the future.
Great, thanks again, Aaron, for that. Sherry Ziller, I might ask you to take the next question. It's a good one. I don't know that I have the answer to it though. Does the RDA need letters of support in resident testimony for the state budget committee hearings?
Yeah, I mean, we would be happy to receive them if ones were drafted, and you can send them directly to us. And I don't know that we have a necessary template on what we would include, but that is not a bad idea, and we would definitely consider it. I think I think every little bit helps with these sorts of things. So if anyone is willing to draft a letter of support on behalf of your community, we would gladly accept them.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why we are conducting the sessions that we're conducting like this one. We really do want your input. We want to make sure that we're in lockstep with what you'd like to see. So hopefully that does lead to the kinds of things we're seeing in that last question, because we want to certainly have the support of the community and the residents who live there. I think we are at the end of the questions that we've received thus far, but we will continue to hold the line for another couple of minutes here just in case other questions pop in. These have been great questions, and they mirror some of you may have attended the Ogden Dunes meeting. Some of you may have attended other station area meetings, and some of these questions do mirror what we're hearing in other communities as well. There is an interest in trails. There is an interest in leveraging the park. There's an interest in understanding, the parking areas around the station and how they function. So if the questions we're hearing tonight kind of reinforce some of the things we've heard in other communities. So just in case you're wondering, the recording for this evening's presentation will be posted onto the webpage. That's www.nwitdd.com. For those who would like to, watch again, or maybe if you had to step out for a moment, you missed a portion of the presentation, or you think this is something that somebody who may want to see, definitely check in on the webpage for a link that you'll be able to view the presentation as well as share it with others.
And I believe it's also immediately available on the RDA's Facebook page. So if you go to Facebook, if you're a Facebook user, it should be recorded on the RDA's Facebook page because we are live. So you should be able to watch it right after this meeting.
Yes, and just to reinforce, we also will have this presentation and the gallery boards posted as well. So so you can peruse sort of at your own pace.
And if I could, Eric, earlier in the presentation, you mentioned the boards that would be presented at City Hall. Those boards were presented today. City Hall opened to the public on Monday. So we are in a position to present those boards to those on the call or others that might be interested in reviewing those static boards that you all prepared. Will be able to answer any questions that folks may have to the best of our knowledge at City Hall. And I hope some folks will come into City Hall and review the boards because I think there's a number of questions that were discussed this afternoon, good questions that there's some answers to them. And so I would really look forward to an opportunity or the opportunity to talk with those who asked those questions and would want to learn a little bit more about the city's ongoing efforts in this area as it relates to implementing North Side or the construction of the Marquette Greenway Trail, land assembly and acquisition, construction of Burns Parkway. The city has, 15, 17 years of work put in toward implementing North Side. And I would, again, as I stated at the beginning of the meeting, why this tool is so attractive and has such promise is because in my opinion, kind of working with the TIF district in Portage, that it's simply going to accelerate opportunity or the ability to capture opportunity. The RDA has been a partner throughout, and this is another tool, again, that demonstrates the RDA's commitment to Northwest Indiana, and in this case, specifically Portage and the town of Ogden Dunes.
Okay, should we wrap it up then, Eric?
I think so. We've done a number of these thus far, and we always seem to right about the hour and 15-minute mark. That's about when we wrap up. So this is kind of fitting the template from the previous ones as well. I'll just say a few words and then I'll turn it over to you, Sherry. Thanks to all of you who participated this evening. We appreciate your energy and excitement for this and your interest in what we're doing, and hope that you can continue to provide us feedback and share out this information to others who you think might want to look at it. And we'll continue to make refinements as necessary in order to get to the next step of our process. Again, thanks very much. And Sherry, I'll turn it over to you to close.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Eric. Yeah, I would just like to say the same thing. Thank you all for your time and participation tonight. The RDA wants to continue to address your concerns and answer your questions to help you better understand the coming economic development and social benefits, and to really keep relaying the message that a TDD complements the economic development and growth path of Portage. So we do want to hear from you. Please visit our website, nwitdd.com. You can submit comments there. And also just to read up on the current information that we have for our proposed TDD locations. And a special thank you to the mayor and to AJ Monroe. Thank you for making time tonight and for your ongoing collaboration and partnership. And with that, Mayor or AJ, if you'd like to say any closing remarks, I'll hand it over to you. But a big thank you to all of you.
I just want to thank you for the great presentation. We're so excited about the TDD. And I know that with COVID last year, it kind of slowed us down a little bit. So I think you're ramping up. You seem to be moving forward again, and I'm excited. And I'm looking forward to people coming in and looking at the boards that we're going to have set up at City Hall. So we're going to get the word out that they're there and hope that people come in and look at them. So thanks for a great presentation.
All right. With that, everyone have a good night. We are going to sign off.
Thank you.
Thank you.